This is Human Within, an interactive VR film that places you in the role of one of the lead characters in a pseudo-science fiction story about transferring human consciousness into the digital space. This releases January 9th, 2025 for the Quest 2 and 3 headsets for $18 US, and for this review, we checked this title out on the Quest 3. I'm always intrigued by the cinematic use of VR, but am typically left wanting, so let's see if Human Within can deliver a unique VR movie type experience, or if it's just more of the same stuff we've gotten already. Hey folks, Ryan for the VR Grid here, and before we get to it, if you enjoy our content, don't forget to do all the YouTube things to help us out, and if you can't get enough VR talk, join us live Thursdays for the Virtual Boys podcast. So, like I said earlier, I do look forward to these types of VR cinematic experiences, as I truly think this genre of film is an underutilized one with a lot of potential. Now with that said, tech limitations and indie budgets tended to hamper previous efforts, making for a unique genre of films that has yet to really grab me. Human Within looks to blend both cinematic and VR gaming into one medium, and succeeds on some levels, but sometimes still feels half-baked. The story starts off with Nyla and her sister Lynn being locked in a room against their will, forced to complete a project by a rather skeezy businessman. While Nyla is awake and actively trying to find a way out of that room, Lynn is not, laying unconscious on a bed nearby, and hooked up to a weird machine. It's this machine that is the crux of the story, as you play as Lynn, who has downloaded her digital self into the virtual world, and like many rogue AIs seen in other films, she can take control of electronics, which is where all the gameplay elements come in. Now, as the story hops from scene to scene, you'll move back and forth from 360 non-VR videos to a sort of VR digital space with plenty of 2D screens all around you which can be interacted with, and when it's game time, there are two game types in here that try to increase immersion. First off, let's get to the 360 non-VR videos, which honestly suck and feel very, very dated. They are by far the worst elements of this experience, as every time I got to view these 360 videos, I just didn't care for them. The resolution is lower, and the lack of depth makes many things just appear really out of scale, and while the focus in these sections is almost always on the performers, looking anywhere else just really felt like I was in a very cheap experience from 6 years ago. These sections don't ruin the experience by any stretch, but they don't do it any favors either, and I much preferred pretty much every other presentation element in here. Now when the story switches to Lynn's view and you're in the digital space, viewing all the different camera angles and other little windows that pop up that are essentially useless but kind of add to the fun, it's a much better experience. The image clarity jumps up dramatically, and with everything happening close to you and in the distance, it just makes for an overall better experience to look at. Throughout the story, Nia might try to hack something and fail, and that's where your new digital abilities come in, and in these sections you'll perform some very light interactions, which takes you to a very basic puzzle system where you have to line up cubes with the same pattern in a row, and then once you do that, you've hacked whatever you're hacking, and the story continues. I found these sections to be quite tedious as well, as handling the cubes was a little awkward, nothing criminal, and once again nothing game-breaking. The basic nature of this puzzle design had me more bored than anything else, and of course everyone gets successively harder, having to line up more cubes and thus discern more patterns, and kinda came off as more time filler than actual game, and while I didn't mind them on my first attempt through this branching story, in subsequent plays, these really annoyed me. The other gaming element in here is when you have to actually dive into digital recreations of real-world environments and must find clues to help whatever situation you're in, which just involves scanning things around you. In these sections, you have to walk around and try to find out what exactly you need to look at and scan to progress the story, with an additional gaming element being to rewind and fast forward time in these moments, allowing you to find clues that may be time sensitive. These sections can be a tad frustrating, as they tend to be a bit hand-holdy when it comes to what you're supposed to look for, thanks to Nia and her incessant talking. And on more than a few occasions, you have to get quite close to an object to scan it, so even though I was trying to scan the appropriate item, I wasn't close enough to do so, and thus thought I couldn't scan it, and kind of wandered around a bit until I figured things out. So there was a bit of annoyance here, and same with the last gameplay stuff. Once you do it the first time, it's the same the second time, so on subsequent replays, these were quite tedious, but I knew exactly what to do and what to look for, so I breezed through them quite fast on subsequent plays. There are a few other lighter interactions scattered throughout this experience, and while they do an okay job at letting you interact with the cinematic world, and allow you to do more than just watch a VR film, most of the gameplay elements in here are pretty forgettable. So much so in fact that I wish there was an option after your first play to just get rid of these sections altogether, as they don't change in subsequent plays, and thus get repetitious quite quickly. Now as far as the overall experience goes, it's actually a lengthier one. I think it's the lengthiest one I've ever played in VR, and I have to give it credit for that. It took me about an hour and a half to get through it the first time I played, with the key reason to replay being the fact you have multiple choices throughout the campaign. When these choices pop up, you'll have to look left or right indicating which option you choose, hold your gaze there for a few seconds, and then let the story unfold. I played through this 2 times fully, and got 2 very different narrative paths and 2 very different endings, so it's worth checking things out to get a different point of view and to change the story up a bit, but that will depend largely upon your investment in the story, and for myself, I wasn't too invested. I found Lin to be the best actor in here, with just about everybody else sort of falling short and feeling amateurish. I'm not saying bad by any stretch, but performances seem to be either too wooden or too exaggerated. Now, I do appreciate the overall quality of the film, as it takes place in multiple settings and uses a ton of cameras to tell the story. As a fan of the TV series 24, I really appreciated the multi-angle views you get from certain scenes, and even when cameras were showing stuff that was happening that was irrelevant to the immediate action, it's quite clear hours and hours and hours of footage was recorded just for the sake of immersion in regard to the story, and I do appreciate that. I think in this review I sounded a little more harsh than I intended, as I did enjoy this interactive film. I just feel like all the shortcomings I mentioned hurt the overall product. The non-VR 360 stuff just has to go. There's just no place for it in modern day VR, and while I did appreciate those VR interactive moments, the longer the story went, the more I felt they got in the way. With that said though, if you're looking for a more chill VR experience, and kind of a proof of concept of where this medium could be heading, I think Human Within sets the foundation for what we should be expecting from these types of experiences going forward. It's an interesting experiment, and one that does get more right than wrong, though it ultimately feels like an indie choose-your-adventure film that got a VR patch. I'm going to give Human Within a 6.5 out of 10. It's okay for what it is, but what it is just won't be for everybody. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching.